Nike revolutionized the running game when they introduced super shoes to the market, making claims like they were going to make you run 5% faster. Next up were the Vaporflies, and eventually a couple of years ago we got the first iteration of the Alphaflys. The 1 blew everyone away, the 2 left some to be desired, but where does the 3 sit? What's up everybody? Welcome to Rad Dad Bod TV. I'm Eric McIntyre, aka Meet the Nike Alphafly 3. What's up everybody? I'm Eric McIntyre, aka Rad Dad Bod, and you're watching Rad Dad Bod TV, where we review running shoes. If it's your first time watching one of my videos and you're looking into some of the specifics of the Alphafly 3, feel free to jump around. You can actually find timestamps in the description below. But if you do jump around, I would sure appreciate if you come back and watch the full video, because it goes a long way in helping me be able to produce high quality content for you. Now today we're obviously talking about the Nike Alphafly 3. Let's start off with a few disclaimers and then we'll jump into some details. Disclaimers and disclosures, I actually got this shoe from a friend who is not in the running industry or running shoe industry at all. Although I'm currently in contact with Nike, I was not in contact with Nike when I originally got these shoes, and I will say that neither Nike nor anyone else gets to see this video beforehand. These thoughts are entirely my own. With that out of the way, let's talk about the intended usage and the price point of the shoe. I think most people know at this point, but the Nike Alphafly 3 is designed for running fast marathons. Now, super shoes are used in other races outside of the marathon distance at this point in time, but the gist of this shoe is it is designed to go fast. It is not a daily trainer. It is very much a race day shoe for whatever distance you are choosing. As such, that is how we will review it and talk about it in today's video. From a price point, this shoe comes in at a whopping $285, which does put it at the far end or more expensive end of running shoes, even super shoes and racing shoes. Although it is on the higher end, more and more super shoes are kind of going that direction, so I wouldn't say that it is necessarily out of range for the type of shoe that it is. Talking about specs, this shoe comes in at 7 ounces in a men's size 9, which is very light. Honestly, the shoe doesn't look light, so I was pretty surprised when I held it in hand and got it on foot for the first time. They do a really good job of keeping this thing lightweight despite it looking big. Now the shoe does have a whopping 40 millimeters in the heel and 32 millimeters in the forefoot for an 8 millimeter heel to toe drop, which if you ran in the original Alphafly 1, it is actually an increase in not just stack height, but an increase in drop. The 1, I believe, had a 5 millimeter drop, and I do think the 2 actually had an 8. So if you're used to the 2, this should feel somewhat similar underfoot. Now, as far as the fit goes, I found that this fit a little bit more accommodating than the past Alphaflys, but overall, I would say this is a narrow fitting shoe throughout. From a length perspective, it does fit true to size. I did not find that it was a little bit short or a little bit long, but again, like I said, from an overall fit, we're talking narrow. It is a narrow heel, but that does keep you in place. It is a narrow midfoot and a narrow toe box. The other thing is it's just kind of low volume overall. It's got kind of a sock-like upper, or a Atom knit is what they call it, and that does keep your foot pretty securely kind of stuck to the shoe. Speaking about the upper specifically, like I said, it is an Atom knit upper, which is very lightweight and very breathable. One thing I will say, although it does look very sock-like, you don't really get kind of the knit mesh other than here on the tongue itself. And compared to a lot of other uppers that are more knit or sock-like, this is probably the one with the best overall lockdown and breathability that I have tried. That's probably because of the narrow fit, if I'm being honest. So there's kind of some trade-offs. A lot of other knit kind of sock-like uppers that I've tried in the past were just too flexible and there was not enough lockdown and you kind of end up shifting around in the shoe as you run. I did not find that to be the case with the Alphafly 3. The lockdown is actually really good. Breathability, like I said, is pretty next level. And there's a good heel counter here as well, just kind of in the bottom of the heel, even though the top here is very flexible. Now, sometimes with a flexible heel or slightly rougher materials here, or for a stronger, more structured heel counter, there's some concern about rubbing or chafing. Personally, I did not find that to be the case. There's actually a little additional cushioning there in the heel as well. And so they did a really good job with the upper of keeping it lightweight, keeping it breathable, keeping it functional, while still giving you lockdown, which is very difficult to do. From a midsole standpoint, this is kind of where the magic happens. You have the Zoom X foam here in the heel as well as the midfoot. Then you have the Zoom Air pods here in the forefoot. In addition to the Zoom X foam, which I believe is a PIBA based foam, and the Zoom AirPods there in the forefoot, you also have a carbon fiber plate that runs throughout the shoe. Now, right out of the box or right on foot when you first put them on, the foam feels very, very soft and very, very squishy. It also feels different than a lot of PIBA foams that you've tried before. If I compare it to, for example, like the Saucony Endorphin Pro, that feels more bouncy underfoot and springy. And this feels almost like squeaky. You can kind of hear it when you walk around actually, and you can kind of hear it as you just play with it there. I don't know if you guys can hear that. It's kind of got this squeak to it. It's an interesting sensation and an interesting tuning of the foam. But as you rock back on your heels, the foam really, really compresses, and you can just start to feel how that's going to be a little bit more responsive than a lot of other shoes. The sensation with the Zoom X pods here in the forefoot makes kind of that feel underfoot almost clunky is maybe not the right word, but almost like choppy or punchy. So with some super shoes, since it's one foam kind of throughout the entire midsole, you get this really nice smooth like heel to toe transition, or maybe it's a firmer foam and so you get kind of a slappy feel. But because of where the pods are positioned in the shoe, you just get really like punchy is probably the best way I can describe it. When I run in the shoe, like it's very loud, like you can hear me repeatedly striking the ground with the pods. Now with this, as you strike the ground, the foam compresses really, really strongly and really, really well, but it propels you forward. It really kind of shoots you forward and propels you onto, you know, your forefoot. And it's one of the most aggressive super shoes or aggressive shoes period that I've ever tried. Now, as such, it's not the most stable shoe in the world. It's not meant to be, and racing shoes are not built to be stability shoes. So there is some instability, but I will say that compared to previous models, or like compared to, for example, like the Vaporfly, the Alphafly is a lot more stable, and they actually gave it a slightly wider base than previous models, especially here in the midfoot, although it's still very narrow. One thing that I do think I need to talk about is in the Alphafly 2, and for some people the Alphafly 1 as well, a lot of people were getting blisters kind of here on the inside of their arch just because of how narrow, and you kind of had this split midsole as well. With the 3, I did not experience those sensations. With the 3, I felt very comfortable underfoot. Overall, I just feel like the Alphafly has such a unique underfoot experience compared to other super shoes, at least in my experience overall. Now, from a pace versatility standpoint, this shoe does not really like to go slow, but it can actually go a little bit slower if you want. It's just very, very bouncy and not going to be a very smooth ride. So I actually did try it out on like some warm-up paces just to see, and the shoe is supportive enough, the shoe is cushioned enough that, yeah, it felt comfortable and easy, but it feels at home once you start to run fast. Now, one thing I do want to call out about this shoe that's particularly interesting is when I really, really push the pace in this shoe, I get exposed in terms of like breakdown in my legs. My calves tighten up very, very quickly in these shoes if I'm really, really pressing the pace and my form is not really buttoned up. And I think because of how this shoe really pushes you onto the forefoot, it really just does change your stride more than any other super shoe that I've run in. Honestly, to the advantage of the runner, but if you don't have the durability built up, or if you're just not used to that stride overall, it can potentially cause some injury if you overdo it with the shoe. So if you are deciding or wanting to try the Alphafly 3, I think that's great. I think you can definitely go for it. I do think this is one of those shoes where faster runners are going to feel most comfortable. I'm not trying to gatekeep the shoe at all, but myself as well, you know, I'm aiming for a 3-hour marathon. I can probably run about a 3:15 right now. And again, as I push the pace in these shoes, I cramp up. They don't work super well with my feet at that pace. But if I'm going for a long run and I'm going to do marathon paces, threshold and above paces, tempo runs, things along those lines, I feel very comfortable at that speed. From an outsole perspective, Nike actually put a much more aggressive rubber underfoot of the Alphafly 3 compared to previous models, and to me, I think it is very, very welcome. I ran on some icy and wet roads throughout the winter in these shoes, and I felt like they gripped the road really, really well when compared to the older versions of the Alphafly. anytime I hit anything kind of wet, they kind of slid and almost hydroplaned. And so I really like the rubber underfoot here, and I don't feel like it adds much extra weight at all. One thing to keep in mind though is this is a racing shoe. It's not a daily use shoe, so it's not built for hundreds upon hundreds of miles. A lot of people say with a super shoe, you really get like 100 good miles, and then after that, it kind of regresses to a normal shoe. But with that, again, there's going to be some elements like the traction or the outsole itself that will probably wear down quicker compared to other daily shoes because they're not meant to be a daily workhorse. For me personally, I did start to notice some wear kind of there in the heel, so just keep that in mind. Again, not a daily trainer. Now, as far as who's this shoe for, we kind of already talked about it. I think those who are natural forefoot strikers are going to be most comfortable in this shoe just overall. I do think that the base of the shoe makes it more accessible to a wider range of runners just because it is a little bit more stable than its predecessors. But again, this is a premium price shoe. It is made to go fast. And so a lot of people are just not going to love this shoe. I think that there's a lot of other super shoes on the market that are just going to be a lot more accommodating. So while this shoe could technically be used by anyone who wants to race, I wouldn't say this is like a beginner carbon plated shoe. I would say this is like an advanced carbon plated shoe. That being said, I actually have talked to the designer of the Nike Alphafly 3, and what he said is he did design the shoe to be run in by everyone and accessible to everyone, despite it being very aggressive and very fast. When it comes to shoe usage though, it's very subjective, it's very personal, so I would just encourage, if you are someone who wants to try the Alphafly 3, that's great. Try it on and see if you can get a run in it first, because for me, I love the shoe. I can't run in it as much as I would like, and I definitely couldn't race a marathon in it personally. Now, talking through some comparisons. I don't have it up here right now, but I do have it down in my garage. The Nike Vaporfly 3 compared to the Nike Alphafly 3, the Vaporfly 3 is going to be, I believe it's lighter weight, but it feels a lot more nimble and a lot more quick. If I were to do some track work, I would much prefer the Vaporfly 3, but if I were going longer distances, kind of the half marathon, maybe even the 10K, I would maybe start to lean more towards the Nike Alphafly 3. Sensation underfoot, the Vaporfly I feel like has a smooth transition, but is very quick. And like I said, the Alphafly is really a lot more punchy. As far as other super shoes released in 2024 that kind of stack up to the Alphafly, I find that the Asics Metaspeed Sky Paris is kind of a less aggressive overall feel compared to the Alphafly 3, but has a similar kind of punch and a similar kind of underfoot feel. The foam is also feeling a little bit firm compared to a lot of other super shoes. Like I said, I don't think the Alphafly 3 is firm, but I do feel like it's a little bit more squeaky or has less overall like pure squish than some of the other shoes on the market. And that's neither good or bad, it just is. The Asics is also going to be a lot more accommodating of a fit, at least in that toe box. And so if you're looking for something that has, again, a similar feel, but is maybe a little bit wider fit overall in comparison, I do think that the Metaspeed Sky Paris is going to be a good option for you. Now, another shoe that kind of reminds me actually of the Alphafly is the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro 2. This is another shoe that just has such a unique underfoot feel because of the obvious lack of heel, and so it just really pushes you onto your forefoot. Kind of the same way that the Alphafly does. While they're very different shoes overall, I think how they kind of stress your calves are going to be somewhat similar. Personally, I like the Alphafly 3 more. I found the Mizuno Wave Rebellion Pro 2 to be a little bit too unique for my tastes. But again, how they propel you forward, how they push you onto the toes, kind of a similar overall feel there. Direct competitor to the Alphafly 3, we've got the Saucony Endorphin Elite. The Saucony Endorphin Elite is going to be about, I think it's a little bit heavier, but around that same overall weight. It's got the Power Run HG as a way to try and compete against the Alphafly, and I find that they are equally as aggressive as the Alphafly 3s. The difference is that it's going to be, again, a wider overall fit over here, and it's going to be a lot more stable than the Alphafly 3. So I think you get a lot of the same sensations. I think they're very similar in speed. I don't think that the Endorphin Elite is as punchy as the Alphafly 3 though. Again, not good or bad, it just is, and I think these would just come down to kind of the preference underfoot or underfoot sensation. Just some final thoughts on the shoe. All in all, I actually think Nike knocked it out of the park with this shoe. I genuinely wish that I could run in it more, and I'm going to be working my lower limbs to be able to withstand more miles in these shoes, because I think they're a lot of fun, and I would love to be able to take these at least onto like a half marathon distance and really put them to the test. Narrow shoe overall, as with most Nikes. It is what it is, but I think they addressed a lot of the issues in terms of kind of the fit underfoot with that narrow midfoot. It's still narrow, but it doesn't blister as much anymore, which is really, really nice. And I really, really love the upper of this shoe. Obviously, you don't want to just wear a shoe because it looks cool, but I love the overall aesthetic of this shoe. I think they knocked it out of the park. And I think that if you're a forefoot striker, and if you're someone who especially has been running for decades and has really, really strong lower limbs, really great running economy, then this shoe is going to be a winner on your foot. For me, I've got work to do, and I still love it. So that's the Alphafly 3. Now, if you stuck around to the end, I sure appreciate it. Let me know in the comments if you have any additional questions or input on the shoe. Obviously, all these thoughts are my own. A lot of it is subjective, though I try and stay as objective as possible when evaluating a shoe. Now, if you haven't already, please go ahead, like, and subscribe. And just to round out the video, I'm going to leave you with a question, which is, when it comes to the Alphafly 1, 2, and 3, which is your favorite and why?